NIST 800, what? If cybersecurity requirements feels like an alphabet soup to you, they are. There are over 50 of them. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they conflict with each other. Your customers and vendors will tell you need all of them, but you don't need to. So hi, I'm Rohit. I've spent 20 years in the industry working with smaller startups all the way to big corporate clients. I'm currently working in a Fortune 5 company. I started this channel so that I can provide you all the knowledge that I've gained over years for free, so that you can become a better co-founder, CEO, CTO, and can help your startup. If you stick with me for next 10 minutes, I'll tell you how these requirements work. I'll tell you 5 clear buckets where they belong so that when you're talking to your customer the next time, you totally know where they are. Then I'll tell you how to navigate them. And in the end, I'll give you a framework on how you should use them in practice and what's the best way to design a cybersecurity framework. So all these complicated standards can be divided into 5 separate buckets. That's the most simplest way I can explain it to you as a technical co-founder. First bucket is laws. So these are laws that you have to follow because you operate in a certain country. Second are certifications. Now that is something your customers will demand and you'll have to provide them to showcase that you do have security. Third is framework. That is something that is optional as for you as a startup, but I really recommend doing. So that is what provides your cybersecurity program the maturity and the efficiency that you would need. Fourth is technical references. Now consider them as technical standards that you could use to up your security game. For example, you can how to build a secure software. Number 5 are customer contracts. Now these are requirements that are not laws or a requirement from a standard, but these are requirements that your customer wants you to do. Example, hey, you have to have all your employees in America, for example. Now, before we dig into it, one thing that I want to clarify is there's a difference between security and compliance. While both of these terms are used interchangeably, they are different. Security is the security of the infrastructure. Compliance is the act of showing that you meet all requirements of a particular paper. So you meet all requirements of a law or you meet all requirements of a certification. Another thing before we dig deep into this, not only have I talked about security standards here, but I've also included some privacy standards as well as some AI frameworks that recently came out. Bucket 1, laws and regulations. So what these are the laws of the land and they apply to you based on where your users live and what data you touch. So laws is what governments pass and regulations is what enforces them. So some of the prominent laws that you might have heard of or not heard of are HIPAA, FISMA, GDPR, and then I'll have some more linked here. Those are all laws and then they are enforced by regulations. So for example, FISMA is a federal law which mandates some security protections to be implemented by US agencies on the user data, but it's enforced by the agency itself. So for example, IRS has something called IRS Regulation 1075. HIPAA also has HIPAA security and privacy rules. This is something you can't get away with, and if you break a law, if it's identified that you've broken a law by means of how your software works, you can have penalties, jail, fines, and obviously there are reputational impacts. So yeah, so take these seriously. Like you cannot get away with breaking laws. So what you have to make sure is that you're complying to the law. Now, one thing good about these laws are since these are laws, these are not auditable. So what you can do is just create a document on how you comply with the law, make it available publicly. You can also have logos on your website, HIPAA compliant. But before you do any of that, you have to make sure that you have understood the law applicable to you as well as the regulations. Those are applicable to you. Have done your due diligence, implemented whatever the requirements are, documented them so that you can just prove that you've done your due diligence. Bucket number 2, certifications. So certification is something that your customers will demand. Now, if I'm running a company and if I have to make sure that my vendors are compliant, there's literally no easy way for me other than just going and physically check them for everything. And then I cannot do it for all my vendors. So the easiest way to solve this problem is by having certifications. So basically, Certification is when you hire a third party who would come in and perform a certification against prominent standards. Now, some of the standards that are already available are SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI-DSS. Now, again, these three become applicable based on what you do. SOC 2 typically is done by SaaS companies and where you're doing some processing. ISO 27001 is also a good standard. You usually not see them too much in US, but it's very, very popular in some of the other parts of the world, including European Union, as well as I've seen it a lot in India as well. The other one, PCI-DSS. Now that if you touch credit card information, it becomes applicable, and then you have to do it. So certification is something you do to prove that you handle security the way it should be handled for that particular standard. And also it acts like a blockchain of sorts of trust between customers and vendors. So I'll ask my vendors for SOC 2 reports to make sure they are handling my data the way it should be handled. And then I give a SOC 2 to my customer to prove that everything's connected and controlled. You usually have to pay a third party to come in and audit you. Technically, all of them are voluntary, like you can do SOC 2 or choose not to do SOC 2, but at times you have to do it because that's probably the only way you can showcase that you do a good job with security. Some of the other popular certifications, as I told, other than PCI, DSS, ISO 27001 and SOC 2 is SOC 1, FedRAMP, that's for cloud service providers. High Trust is another one used in healthcare. StateRAMP, CMMC for defense contractors. Bucket 3, frameworks. So what frameworks are? They provide you a set of processes, guidelines, and procedures to organize your security program. So you should typically start here, but no one starts here, right? So what happens if you use a framework is that it provides you the basic foundation of your cybersecurity program, and then you can build on top of it. So for example, NIST CSF is a really popular framework, which I think most startups should start at. The another one is NIST RMF. NIST RMF, I would recommend if you are actually working with the federal government, or you think you'll be working for the government one day. So these are two big ones. Then there are some other ones as well. I'll list them here. But the idea is when you have a framework and you build on top of it, handling multiple compliance programs become easier. So for example, as I just mentioned, I was being audited for SOC 2 and some of the other audits. What I did was I established a baseline framework, and then what you can do is you can just add the compliance requirements on top of it. An example, so let's say your password policy is currently 8 characters, but now all of a sudden you decided to accept payment card information and you started doing payments. Now you have to comply to PCI-DSS, and PCI-DSS requires 12 character passwords. Now if you're using a framework, you can very easily go into your password policy and then you'll be compliant with this PCI-DSS requirement. But if you do not use a framework, it becomes a mess, because one standard has different requirements than the other standards, and it's really very difficult to merge two of them to create something holistic. So yeah, framework provides you a lot of value if you use it in your cybersecurity program. You don't have to use it on day one, but I would strongly recommend to start using frameworks to bring structure, maturity, efficiency to your cybersecurity programs. That way you can pivot if requirements change. Overall, my suggestion is to pick one of the frameworks. I think if you don't intend to work with the government, probably the best one to do is NIST CSF, and just build on top of it, and then that's it. The next bucket is bucket 4, which are technical references. So now these are some specialized documentation and standards and papers that can help you define your cybersecurity program and also provide it the depth. So this is the meats and potatoes of your cybersecurity program. So for example, if you're looking for some sort of aid for your developers to write secure software, then you should ask them to follow OWASP top 10 guidelines. If a cybersecurity professional doesn't know what controls to implement, then he can use NIST SP 853 Rev 5. And then there are a bunch of other similar looking standards that you could use. So for example, NIST SP 800 series has a lot of papers that can provide you depth across a variety of topics that you could use and implement. MITRE attack framework, now that is something that your cybersecurity team can use in identifying attacks. Your application security team can also use the MITRE attack framework to when they are doing threat modeling, for example. If you are in a cloud computing environment, then you can also use something like CSA, Cloud Security Alliances, CCM, which is a framework of a lot of controls that you could implement directly on your cloud computing environment. So basically, this is where details are. Like, this is where controls are, details are. This is where how is on how security should be implemented across the board, across an enterprise. Bucket number 5. Now this is the hidden one. This is customer contractual requirement. So what this is that other than agreeing to all these standards and frameworks and certifications that you've agreed to, when you sign a customer contract, there are requirements in there that might be covered in some of these standards but might not be. So some of the ones which I've seen frequently are, hey, you need to be operating these systems in continental United States. So for example, now my experience in past 10 to 15 years have always been working with US governments, and hence these requirements. But I've seen stricter requirements where, like, hey, this has to be done in US by US personnels who are US citizens. So now some of these requirements, you won't see them in any laws or standards. Now these are coming to you by your contracts. These are customers enforcing these requirements on you. So one of the problems that I've realized is a lot of companies do sign their contracts, but they never copy all these compliance requirements, or they never copy all these contractual requirements and bring them over inside their cybersecurity program. So what that causes is, you think you are meeting all the requirements, but at times you are not, and then you are prone to penalties and fines. Building up from my last video or connecting it here, the customers are gonna give you a big list of requirements that they want to do. And I created a video just for that when customer gives you a big list, how should you negotiate it? I given 5 powerful strategies in my past video on how you can push back or handle those requirements in a way that it's the most cost effective for you and makes the most sense for you. Please watch it. That will provide you some weapons to push back. So I think as a founder or co-founder, the best way to handle this is, maybe if you're short on time, just do the certification your customer wants. But before you go for the certification, make sure you have implemented whatever the requirements of the certification are. Also, make sure you've considered all the laws and have implemented those requirements as well. Eventually, just move to a framework. I will suggest using NIST CSF to getting started with it. Bring in all your controls into one place, create a unified control framework, which will have controls coming from all the laws you have to follow, all the certifications you're doing, as well as all your customer requirements that you're contractually agreed with. Put all of them at one place, let the framework do its thing, and then you can keep on maturing the whole thing. If things change or if compliance requirements change in future, you can bring in more compliance standards to your framework, and then can increase it. The one thing that's really very important to understand is all these different frameworks were created to cater different requirements. So for example, PCI-DSS is very focused on credit card information. HIPAA is very focused on healthcare information. They have their pros and cons, and they focus on their specific areas. But while they focus on one area, they leave a big gap as well. So it's really important to have a holistic framework and a holistic cybersecurity program that covers everything, which some of these standards might ignore because they are not focusing on that specific thing. Again, thanks a lot. If you're still watching, consider subscribing if you feel it provided you some value. Yeah, thanks again.